These discussions must also address how we, as special educators, respond to the racial discord and discussions occurring in homes and communities across the country. I hope that we can see this time as an opportunity for us all to think about schooling in America and how we should strive to create a better way forward for teachers, leaders, children, and families. We've heard many positive comments on the previous webinars and appreciation for resources and strategies shared to support teachers, leaders, and families. OSEP-funded technical assistance centers have developed high-quality, relevant, and useful products to be used to improve outcomes for children with disabilities, not just during these unprecedented times, but especially during these times when each minute of instruction has to be best used. I encourage you to access the resources we share today and others at osepideasthatwork.org. As I said earlier, today's webinar will focus on back-to-school strategies. We will hear from several of our technical assistance centers. We will also hear from several experts answering questions many of you have asked us to address. As you may have noted, this final webinar is a bit longer than previous ones, and I will be joined after the center presentations for a live panel to discuss some of the most pressing back-to-school issues. Thank you for joining us today. Please continue to let us know how we can support your efforts. And now I will turn it over to our first center.
Hi, I'm Mary Brown, the director of the CEDER Center. And today I'm joined by Michael Kennedy, a faculty member at the University of Virginia, and Sean McDonald, a former teacher and new doctoral student at the University of Virginia. Today, we are going to be describing two of the CEDER Center's many resources for supporting teaching and learning in universities and in school districts. And we even have a new resource about supporting families at home. We know that in spring 2020, many school teachers and families were scrambling to help students learn in remote environments. One resource CEDER developed that can be useful is the Family Guide to At-Home Learning, developed by CEDER staff member Abby Foley. In this resource, Abby provides families with strategies they can use to support their children's learning in online and face-to-face environments. The great thing about this resource is that it's available in both English and Spanish. It's clear and easy to use. Abby highlights strategies that are fundamental to supporting instruction in schools. Model, provide clear direction, support, staying on task, specific feedback, and goal setting. These strategies are components of high leverage practices that the CEDER Center and the Council for Exceptional Children have developed and disseminated widely. For each strategy, Abby provides examples of how parents can apply the strategy in their daily lives and how it can help their child learn. We encourage school districts to present these strategies in their parent conferences and meetings as ways that families can help to support learning at home.
I'm Michael Kennedy from the University of Virginia. In the second resource, we explain how the high leverage practices can be used in face-to-face, online, and hybrid learning environments. Many of you are already familiar with the HLPs and the critical role they play in providing high-quality instruction and behavioral supports for students with disabilities. My team at UVA has developed a series of videos that teachers and teacher educators can use to learn about the HLPs and help with implementation. This spring, I witnessed many teachers using these practices in their online instruction. Mr. Sean McDonald was one of those teachers. Last spring, Sean was teaching social studies to students with and without disabilities when COVID hit. Like all teachers across the country, Sean had to quickly figure out how to deliver high-quality instruction in the online environment. Sean knew he could turn to the HLPs to help support his students' individualized needs. Let's listen to Sean discuss and then see an example of him implementing these critical practices.
Hi, my name is Sean McDonald, and I taught at a high school teaching inclusive classrooms with kids with special needs, including English language learners as well as students with learning disabilities. When we first went online because of COVID, we didn't know what to do. We were very uncertain about what the future would hold, and we were very uncertain about how our practices would transfer from the in-person classroom setting to the online setting. I wanted my instruction to really stay relevant and quality, so being able to use HLPs was huge because I was still able to provide vocab instruction and text comprehension strategies that I would have done in the classroom, but now it's flexible enough to do in the online platform. In the following clip, you'll see me teach, explain, and model one of our strategies called the Are You Asking strategy. It was a cognitive strategy, and then we did it through explicit instruction. My hope was that we would be able to replicate what would be in the classroom online.
So Megan, let's go to the second step. So obviously you see you with the image, okay? Using the visual tool on our screen, what does you stand for again?
Underline.
Underline the what?
The choice made.
Underline the choice that Deontay is making. Good. So I will now locate the choice made, and I can do this best by quickly scanning the paragraph for action verbs. Okay? Action verbs like decide, choose, making a decision. So anytime the character is using those actions, that's where I can best find where he's going to make the choice. Okay, so I need to find those action verbs. Another hint is, will Deontay's choice likely be at the beginning of the story or more at the end of the story, do you think?
At the end.
At the end, exactly. So I'm going to start from the bottom and then move my way up. Okay, so I'm going to start scanning. And look, I found the action verb chooses. So he chooses to stay after school to get extra help for science. Can we go ahead and underline that sentence as the choice being made?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Excellent. So I'm going to go ahead and underline that. All right. Now let's go to the third and final step.
In addition to explicit instruction and cognitive strategies, I also had incorporated opportunities to respond, as well as checks for understanding that help my student actively engage. This was in an individual setting. In whole group settings, though, I oftentimes would use the chat box, the Zoom thumbs up, and other mechanisms of technology to allow students to stay engaged. Initially, the task of teaching online to students with various needs was a bit daunting to us, and not me and other teachers. However, fortunately, HLPs gave a really good structure that I was able to pull from of great practices that allowed me to push my students forward even in the face of adversity.
So as Sean showed us, HLPs can be used in online and face-to-face environments. As schools plan for the fall, it's our sincere hope that principals, teachers, and other educators will work in collaboration to help figure out how to implement these HLPs within the online learning environment. We also urge educators to use the family resources introduced in the first part of the video. In conclusion, we presented several of CEDER's resources available to teachers, parents, faculty, State Department leaders, and administrators. To learn more about all of these resources, please visit www.ceder.org. Once on the site, please go to the Resources tab, where you'll be able to find all of the resources CEDER has to offer. Stay tuned to more resources from the CEDER Center that can support implementation of high leverage and other effective practices that can be used in online and face-to-face environments. If we work together, we can ensure students with disabilities can achieve important outcomes regardless of the environment in which they are taught.
All right, next we have Pat joining us from the University of Northern Colorado, and he is the chair of the Association on Rural Special Education. So the first question, Pat, I work with schools in rural settings. They have limited access to educational technology. How can we best support teachers and families to ensure students continue to have access to quality instruction?
Thank you, Lori, for inviting me to share time with you on this webinar. That is an excellent question. I want to first emphasize that whenever we discuss rural issues, we must acknowledge the complexity and diversity of each rural community and rural school. No two rural settings are the same. Let me share some quick facts about rural education. More students in the U.S. attend rural schools than the nation's 85 largest school districts combined. In fact, 1 in 5 students are enrolled in rural schools, representing about 9.3 million students. It's important to note that 1 in 6 of rural students lives below the poverty line. 14% of rural students attend high poverty schools. Many school districts are underfunded and some lack a steady funding revenue stream. However, during the current pandemic, rural areas have experienced substantial issues related to internet connectivity. So let me share the internet struggles that we were able to observe prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. 97% of Americans in urban areas had access to high-speed internet broadband service. In rural areas, the access falls to about 65%. On tribal lands, barely 60% have access. So 55 million Americans cannot reap the benefits of the digital age. The digital divide was truly exposed during the COVID-19 crisis. Teachers and families have been observed sitting in their cars outside of schools trying to use the school's broadband system so that their children can receive their education and avoid regression in learning. So what can we do in the short term during the pandemic? If students are being taught mostly online, make sure that students have access to a computer and the internet. Collaborate with parents to make sure that they are included in the conversations. Follow up with students who are not attending online. The issues may be more serious than we expect. Provide parents with their own learning opportunities so that they can help their children at home. They may need help with technology, scheduling, managing the learning schedules of their multiple children. Fund school districts and their efforts to provide technologies to schools and students. Make sure that funding formulas fully include rural areas. Mandate that internet providers improve internet coverage in rural areas. Internet coverage mapping has been a major issue. If students are returning to their schools, here are a few suggestions for supporting families and students. Make sure that all students have access to their own computer. Check in with families to make sure that they have access to the internet. Sometimes it can be very spotty in rural areas. Rural poverty is also a very real issue, and families will choose food and shelter over internet connectivity. Promote collaboration with families regarding student learning and health issues. Provide online homework support sessions and assess students in low impact settings whenever possible and with as much social distancing and wearing masks as possible. Again, Lori, thank you for the opportunity to contribute.
Thank you. Now we will hear from another one of our centers.
Hello, my name is Sarah Sago, and I'm the Deputy Director of the National Center on Improving Literacy. The National Center on Improving Literacy is a partnership among literacy experts, university researchers, and technical assistance providers with funding from the United States Department of Education. Our mission is to increase access to and use of evidence-based approaches to screen, identify, and teach students with literacy-related disabilities, including dyslexia. Today, we are presenting our work to provide educators and families with an evidence base and information on how best serve students with literacy-related disabilities during and following the novel coronavirus pandemic. Students with disabilities are likely to have regressed more than others during COVID-related school shutdowns and distance learning. Now, more than ever, it's essential that schools provide students with disabilities an education that is based on evidence and uses principles of effective instruction, regardless of the mode of instruction. For literacy, this includes explicit and systematic instruction focused on the 5 big ideas of reading. Specifically, all students should receive instruction on phonological awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. Students with disabilities should be provided with additional intervention time devoted to their specific areas of need. Small group or one-on-one intervention should be provided 3 to 5 times per week. It is important that schools use evidence-based practices when delivering literacy instruction and intervention to students with disabilities. Guidance on the evidence base of particular programs can be found in the academic intervention charts from the National Center on Intensive Intervention. Many features of effective reading intervention may still be successfully delivered in a distance learning setting. For example, interventions should be focused on all or a subset of the 5 big ideas of reading. For students that are behind, there is insufficient time to teach all of the content knowledge the student is missing and all of the content knowledge the student needs to learn to meet grade level objectives. Thus, big ideas focus on the most important content students need to learn. Interventions should also emphasize high leverage, explicit instructional practices, including explanations, models, frequent opportunities for student practice, checks for understanding, and immediate specific feedback. Finally, educators should continue to monitor student progress during reading interventions, whether the interventions are provided through a remote, on-site, or hybrid educational setting. Progress monitoring data allows educators to measure whether an intervention is of appropriate duration, quality, and intensity to support student success. We have several resources for educators and families available on our website to support back to school and continuity of learning during COVID-19 for children with disabilities. First, under our Tools and Resources drop-down menu, you can access our implementation toolkits. These toolkits provide educators and families with evidence-based information and resources to understand key foundational reading skills and how to support a child's development of these areas in and out of school. Second, under our Tools and Resources drop-down menu, you can find and filter our Ask an Expert responses on a variety of topics. Answers to the questions, what are the characteristics of effective instruction, and what is the best way to teach the alphabetic principle, are relevant to literacy instruction in both typical and atypical learning environments. Third, under our Tools and Resources drop-down menu, you can access and filter our Improving Literacy briefs and infographics. For example, our Remote Literacy Learning, Families as Partners, Literacy Brief, and Infographic explains remote literacy learning, the role of families and schools, tips for supporting remote literacy learning, and providing an environment conducive to it, and embedded hyperlinks to resources to learn more. Fourth, our Kids Zone is a space where parents and children can access ebooks, audiobooks, and stream videos of stories read aloud. Children can also find games that focus on different literacy skills and our original comic series. Finally, our resource repository is a searchable library of curated materials such as lesson plans, tools, activities, and videos from reliable sources. You can filter by audience, resource topic, and resource type to locate specific resources to meet your needs. Please return to our resource repository often as we're regularly adding new resources. Likewise, check our Tools and Resources areas on our website as we'll be releasing new ENSO resources in the future to support back to school and continuity of learning for children with disabilities, including a new remote literacy learning toolkit. Thank you for watching, and we hope you find these materials useful. For more information, Please visit improvingliteracy.org.
So Karen, from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, here's your question. How can we provide services and supports to medically vulnerable children with complex disabilities through distance instruction or remote learning?
That is a great question, and one that I'm fielding quite often these days. Administrators, educators, and parents are understandably concerned about meeting the educational needs of all children through distance instruction and remote learning. But children who have complex disabilities present particular concerns. Many are unable to interact directly with technology as a result of physical or sensory impairments. Others are just difficult to engage for a variety of reasons, and still others have health status that varies from moment to moment and certainly day to day. Nonetheless, educators across the country found many innovative ways to provide supports and services to this group of children when they had to make the shift to remote learning this spring. In nearly every case, these supports and services required the active involvement of parents, siblings, or other caregivers. These families have experienced stress in a way that's often unimaginable to the rest of us. But many of these same families have also begun to engage in their child's education in a way that wasn't possible in the past. For example, I know of a group of parents who have become critical friends to one another as a result of the shift to remote and distance learning this spring. Recognizing the stress that the parents of her students were experiencing, this teacher started a Thursday evening parents group via Zoom. Over time, the parents began supporting one another. These parents became active in problem solving around ways to meaningfully engage their children as learners. In another case, the teaching assistants in a school became the primary points of contact for the families of some of the students they supported. The teaching assistants scheduled synchronous time to support families, and they could flex that time as needed since they were focusing on just scheduling a couple of students instead of a whole classroom full. Prior to the planned synchronous sessions, these teaching assistants often sent 30 to 90-second videos to families via text. The personalized videos helped families know what they would focus on during the sessions. This allowed families to orient their children as they were getting set up, and it seemed to increase families' commitment to engaging with their child during the synchronous sessions. Some of the specific tools we're using to support this work come from two OSEP-funded Stepping Up Technology implementation projects. The first, Project CORE, focuses on building early symbolic communication for students with complex disabilities. The strategies and supports in Project CORE are helping families navigate their everyday routines more successfully while simultaneously helping their children learn important symbolic communication skills. We're also using tools like Tar Heel Reader, an online library of thousands of open source, universally accessible books for beginning readers of all ages. Just before the onset of COVID-19 this spring, we added a shared reading version of Tar Heel Reader. Educators are using Tar Heel Shared Reader to create interactive shared reading lessons that they record for families to view on demand. Educators model these during synchronous interactions with their students, and then they share them with families so that they can incorporate shared reading into their own daily routines. Providing supports and services to medically vulnerable children with complex disabilities really requires a focus on routines. When we can be flexible with schedules, when we can be responsive to students' changing medical needs, we can help families and we can increase access to the supports and services these children need.
Thank you. Now we will hear from another one of our centers.
Hi, my name is Brandy Simonson, and I'm the co-director of the Center on PBIS. I'm joined today by my colleague, Dr. Sharon Lorman, who directs the New Jersey Positive Behavior Support in Schools initiative in partnership with the New Jersey Department of Education. Together, we're going to share a new resource from the Center on PBIS and give an example of how one state, New Jersey, has used the guidance to adapt their supports for districts and schools. The Returning to School During and After Crisis Guide was developed in collaboration with the State Implementation and Scaling Up of Evidence-Based Practices Center, the National Integrated MTSS Research Network, the National Center on Improving Literacy, and the Lead for Literacy Center. In this guide, we emphasize a focus on basic practices, the smallest number of things we can do well to support student growth. In particular, we emphasize the importance of connecting, screening, supporting, teaching, monitoring to create positive, predictable, and safe learning environments that enhance all students' social, emotional, and behavioral growth. While this is critical for all students, it's especially critical for students identified as at risk or with disabilities. To enable schools, districts, and states to implement these practices, we emphasize key systems features, represented in this graphic, to include both executive team functions in blue boxes and implementation functions in green boxes. Those implementation functions include training, coaching, and evaluation. I'm going to turn it over to Sharon, who's going to give examples of how her state has used this guidance to pivot into the new context and their support of districts and schools in New Jersey. Thank you for the opportunity to share the planning that is occurring in New Jersey. My name is Sharon Norman, and I'm the Director of New Jersey Positive Behavior Support in Schools. New Jersey Positive Behavior Support in Schools is a partnership between the Boggs Center, Rutgers University, and the New Jersey Department of Education, Office of Special Education. Since 2003, we've provided comprehensive professional development to school personnel across the state to support the implementation and sustainability of positive behavior interventions and supports. We know that universal prevention provides an important foundation for all students, but especially for students with disabilities who benefit from the consistency in how adults communicate, support, and manage expectations. One of our priorities this year is to help school personnel translate features of their school-based universal prevention plans to also apply across fully remote and blended schedules. As the New Jersey Positive Behavior Support in Schools team moves forward with planning, we're focusing on how we can enhance our training content and adjust training delivery to reflect the needs and priorities of this school year. Because the scope of transforming our curriculum and professional development is expansive, having a resource like the PBIS Center Returning to School document helps us to ground decision-making. As Brandy just described, the PBIS Center guidance on returning to school before, during, and after a crisis offers states, districts, schools, and educators with an opportunity to systematically reflect on what they have in place and considerations needed for moving forward. This document provides the content from which a state team, like New Jersey Positive Behavior Support in Schools, can implement a crosswalk with their development plans to ensure that the strategic plan for this unique school year reflects critical system features. Reflecting on the extent to which features of the guidance document are being addressed supports our efforts as a state training team to prioritize planning needs, select the best strategies, and ensure that there aren't any gaps in our planning. This slide example illustrates a sample crosswalk for the training feature. The left-hand column lists the items from the guidance document on training within the prior to a return to school year phase. For example, develop training capacity at the state level or provide a plan to develop alternative training capacity. The right-hand column illustrates some of the New Jersey Positive Behavior Support in Schools activities that are currently underway to transform our professional development delivery system in a way that's flexible and allows learning to continue seamlessly, regardless of the type of schedule a school or district is using. Among the initial strategies we're working on now that address the critical features in this section include transitioning training materials, handouts, and tools to an online course platform that provides a user-friendly way to access training materials remotely, reorganizing full-day training content into modules that are more effective in an online format, creating short 15 to 30-minute video training modules that allow for flexible learning schedules, and restructuring coaching support and coaching delivery protocols so that coaching can be delivered remotely. Using the guidance document in this fashion allows us to ensure that the plans being developed reflect the critical features before, during, and after the initial return to school. As the school year progresses, it will be important for us to continually assess the needs of schools and districts we serve and the ways in which we can meet those needs. Thank you, Sharon, for such a fantastic example. We invite you all to visit our website, pbis.org, to view the resource we previewed today and to continue to explore additional resources to support the return to school. We'll be adding webinars, videos, and other supports at the state, district, school, classroom, family, and student levels. Thank you for your time today. Take care.
Next, we have Casey. Casey is a behavioral health therapist from California. Next question. I'm worried about the social and interpersonal skills my child is missing. What are some strategies or practices we can do to support positive connections and relationships while being socially distant?
Great question, Lori. As we all socially distance, parents are encouraged to implement PBIS strategies in the home, such as establishing consistent daily routines that help create a sense of safety, security, and predictability for our children. The Interconnected Systems Framework weaves mental health into these PBIS strategies and emphasizes the importance of our children's social emotional well-being so that they can build resilience for any traumas experienced during these very challenging times. Given that resilience is developed through loving relationships and positive connections, it's important that we build social connection into the daily routine for our children so they have regular contact to the people in their lives that they care about the most and who can remind them that they're cared for and valued. Encourage them to set up recurring virtual meetups, write letters, or make phone calls so that they can remain connected and also use their interpersonal skills on a regular basis while we're socially distanced. As parents and caregivers, you are the primary relationship and the most important one that helps them thrive. So it's also important that you spend time with them. Choose activities that foster engagement and connection, such as reading together or playing, spending time outdoors together. Keep an open dialogue with them about how they're feeling, if they're experiencing any sorts of fears or worries while we're moving through these unprecedented times. If you're concerned about your child's mental health, reach out to their school and see what mental health supports are available to them. You can also find resources on the pbis.org website under Supporting Students with Disabilities at Home, a guide for teachers to support families and students.
Thank you. And now back to more resources and strategies from our centers.
Hello, from the National Center on Intensive Intervention, or NCII. I'm Terry Marks. I co-lead NCII's Intensive Technical Assistance focused on building the capacity of state and local education agencies, universities, practitioners, and other stakeholders to support the implementation of intensive intervention for students with severe and persistent learning and/or behavioral needs. Throughout this presentation, we will share center resources developed by and for educators, as well as hear from educators about their experiences supporting students during the COVID-19 pandemic. Before we get started, we want to orient everyone to NCII's approach to intensive intervention delivery, called Data-Based Individualization, or DBI. DBI is a process that begins by implementing an evidence-based intervention or practice with fidelity. To determine when students may need more intensive supports, we progress monitor using valid and reliable tools. By analyzing those data, we generate a hypothesis about why a student isn't adequately responding and use that hypothesis to inform how to adapt the intervention to better meet their needs. After adapting the intervention, we continue to progress monitor and determine if additional adaptations are needed. The DBI process is iterative and requires educators to effectively use student-level data to guide intervention and instructional decisions. Now we want to draw your attention to some key components that will support the effectiveness of your DBI implementation. First, the use of explicit instruction across academic and social behavioral skills. Second, the use of progress monitoring and implementation fidelity data. And third, a focus on collaboration. We'll learn about these key components to intensive intervention delivery, including ways educators have adjusted their delivery within distance and remote settings. At its core, explicit instruction uses an I do, we do, you do sequence paired with providing students multiple opportunities to respond and receive feedback. Explicit instruction often serves as the foundation of evidence-based interventions across literacy, mathematics, and social behavioral skills, so it's essential to the DBI process we walked through earlier. No matter the setting in which you're starting back to school, NCII has sample lessons that follow an explicit instruction sequence across literacy, mathematics, and behavior. Now we'll hear from North Carolina educator Daphne Brown about how she has adapted her virtual instruction.
I'm finding that I can tailor and individualize the lessons just as I would in the classroom. And I'm also able to add other things on, like having those videos. When you're working with one group, you can tell one group to work with the videos, and while you're direct teaching the others, and then you can kind of flip-flop, and that's a way to get all of the instruction in at one time.
Now, what we know is that database individualization is not possible without data. Educators implementing DBI use ongoing progress monitoring and implementation fidelity data to inform their instructional decisions. Let's watch as Oregon educator Sarah Throde informs students about her school's modified approach to collecting oral reading fluency data using the Zoom platform. NCII will be sharing this content soon.
So you all received an envelope in your packet this week, and just like Corbin said, it had a message, super secret, top secret, no peeking. Here's what we're gonna do. Just like we do when we are at school and Miss Heidi or I come to read with you for 1 minute, usually we come into your classroom and we tell you it's your turn and we go out to the hallway, right? But we're in Zoom. And there isn't really a hallway in Zoom, but there kind of is. It's called breakout rooms. So in just a second, I'm gonna send each of you students to a breakout room with one of our adults here. And it'll be like your own Zoom meeting with just the two of you. And when you get there, that adult is gonna tell you to open up your envelope, and we're gonna do a reading fluency assessment just like we always do at school, where you get to read for 1 minute, okay? Give me a thumbs up if you got it. You know what to do? Perfect.
Last but certainly not least is the need for collaboration and communication to ensure the success of students receiving intensive intervention. In fact, educators we work with through a recent community of practice highlighted the critical role of parents and families now more than ever. For example, community of practice members from Kennedy School in Providence, Rhode Island, shared various strategies that supported their ability to deliver core instruction and intervention without overwhelming educators or students and families. They created clickable visual schedules to communicate their schedule and routines. School principal Amy Burns created a YouTube channel to communicate with families. Her messages from the principal were translated to Spanish to promote equitable communication. Their school psychologist, Atmi Lopez Martins, also followed up with families whose students were not actively engaged during distance learning and also continued to focus on students' social and emotional development virtually. Atmi will now share an individualized lesson she developed within Google Forms to support the co-development of a 5-point scale, a strategy featured in NCII's behavior guide on self-management.
This is an example of one of the lessons. And this one is in 3 parts. You'll see section 1 of 3. And the first section introduces the lesson. So I write a little blurb about the lesson and why I thought we would work on this lesson this week. And then I also ask for identifying information on this first section, since I use it with different students, different grade levels, different classrooms, etc. The next section, I usually add a video or a visual to help the student understand more about the topic. This lesson, I used a short video by the author of the 5-point scale, and it actually gives specific examples to help them understand what's a 1 rating or a 2 rating. And then the last section on this lesson, I added a sample 5-point scale, and then I added some questions to help me and the student create their own 5-point scale.
Visit www.intensiveintervention.org to find out more about additional resources to support delivery of intensive intervention, no matter the setting. From videos of educators and family members using sample lessons to FAQ guides about virtual progress monitoring and implementation stories and lessons learned through our Voices from the Field, we've got you covered. Thank you.
Next, we have Lynn from Vanderbilt University. Lynn, if you could recommend teachers to focus on one instructional practice at this time, what would it be and why?
Thank you, Lori. Multiple studies in the What Works Clearinghouse provide strong evidence in support of explicit instruction for improving the reading and math outcomes of students with disabilities. Accordingly, a recent brief on evidence-based academic supports for students with disabilities, this is from the Gates Foundation's Ed Research for Recovery project, featured the importance of explicit instruction in the current pandemic environment. With explicit instruction, teachers or parents or prior professionals incorporate 8 instructional principles for teaching a new strategy. First, they ensure the student has the necessary background and skills to succeed with that strategy. Second, they explain the strategy using simple, direct language. Third, they make sure the strategy is efficient, with as few steps as possible for tackling that academic task. Fourth, they introduce a new strategy by demonstrating how they, the adult, uses that same strategy while the adult explains how and why each step of that strategy makes sense. Fifth, the adult gradually increases student responsibility for executing and explaining the steps of the strategy in the student's own words. Sixth, the adult provides lots of guided and independent practice, so the student uses the strategy repeatedly to generate many correct responses. Seventh, when the student does make an error, the adult provides corrective feedback quickly and re-explains key ideas. And eighth, the adult incorporates a systematic review across mastered skills, so the student learns to distinguish among different types of words or different types of problems or different types of text structures and so on. In this way, the student learns to apply the right strategy for the task at hand. It's also good to remember that effective practices for developing appropriate social behavior often draw from this same set of explicit instructional principles. Finally, teachers and parents should know that packaged explicit instruction interventions are available to address academic and behavior problems. For example, our Vanderbilt website features peer-assisted learning strategies, which a suite of easy to implement reading and math programs rooted in explicit instruction, which can be conducted in peer-mediated or adult-led fashion. Further, the Office of Special Education Programs National Center on Intensive Intervention website at American Institutes for Research provides information on how to obtain small group explicit instruction, reading and math interventions, and behavior practices to address the performance gaps that many students with disabilities experience.
Thank you for that response. Now back to our center for more strategies and resources.
When our nation initially shuttered the doors of businesses and schools in mid-March, school districts, regional agencies, and state departments, along with publishers and consultants, quickly started pumping out information for educators. The volume was staggering and often confusing. Michigan's Department of Education, along with Michigan's multi-tiered System of Supports Technical Assistance Center, also got very busy, but vowed 2 things. First, we were going to help educators identify information that would be most beneficial at this time. And second, we were going to stay true to the science and research base for effective implementation. Although there could be a host of things demanding teachers' and administrators' immediate attention, Most realize that initial efforts should be simplified and focused on a few things that make the biggest difference. Our best advice, based on 20 years supporting school-wide implementation, is to create a host environment that is safe, predictable, and supportive. This is best done through the teaching and utilization of social and academic routines. You will see this belief in routines to be a common theme in the resources we provide. First, the Technical Assistance Center has created a library of resources located on our website. The resources on the website are divided into supports for teachers and supports for school and district leadership teams. Also included are recently developed practice briefs intended to summarize the best information and research available on 3 key aspects of remote instruction: considerations for the use of instructional packets, for distance learning, and for online learning. On the website, you will also find various videos and professional development resources educators may access whenever it fits their need. In addition to our website, we are currently in the midst of a weekly 4-part webinar series. Again, the emphasis is on routines to create that predictable, safe, and supportive environment. Registrations for our webinar series was capped by our technology at 1,000 participants for each offering. All sessions filled in weeks in advance of the live presentations. Recordings of each webinar, though, along with all supporting materials, is also being made available via our website. The series contains 4 unique yet integrated topics to address the whole child. This graphic outlines the series and indicates the use of both national experts and state-level consultants and implementers. The first webinar focuses on having a positive and effective school climate. A welcoming and positive school climate motivates students and educators to want to be in school and sets up environments conducive to learning. The second focuses on social-emotional well-being. Social-emotional well-being helps to address the personal challenges experienced during the educational disruptions and return to school, creating a mindset for learning. The third webinar pertains to high-leverage instruction. Effective instruction through high-leverage practices is always important, but crucial at this time as it directly addresses learning affected by the COVID slide and missed educational opportunities. Our last webinar focuses on family engagement. Family engagement and homeschool partnerships are essential in moving forward to address our current normal as well as ensuring student progress. These 4 themes are integrated and aligned for a comprehensive approach to address the needs of all students. As you can see by the note in the lower left-hand corner, this series is just the beginning. For us, the emphasis on promoting the use of academic and social routines always comes back to the individual child. Recent interviews with teachers and administrators who have worked with us only serve to reinforce our efforts. I'll leave you with one special education teacher's comments about the impact. What do you notice the difference between classrooms that fully utilize some of the same strategies you're using in intervention versus those classrooms that maybe aren't yet using as many active participation strategies?
Yeah, our teachers in our building have had years of training and being immersed and the expectation that they're using the active participation strategies, and the ones that do it makes my job easy, but more importantly, the kids are really able to engage in those classrooms. They feel comfortable participating because they know the strategy that's being used, and they now just have to apply or read or use whatever new information is there because those strategies are already in place. And I see confidence, and I see them being able to really generalize what they've learned in the intervention class and see it in a bigger, broader picture in the gen ed class. And it really is beautiful to see them feel comfortable in that setting.
And next we have Kasha from the OSEP Early Childhood Technical Assistance Center. And your question is,
I work with young children. Engaging them in distance learning is hard to do. What ideas do you have to engage preschool children, including those with disabilities, in distance learning opportunities?
Great question. We are in unprecedented times, and we know that teachers and providers face challenges to successfully serve preschool children, including young children with disabilities. There is no one strategy to guide how we engage children. Instead, we need to draw on existing evidence-based practices to engage young children and ensure equity and inclusion for preschool children with disabilities. To that end, I'd like to highlight two practices. First, it's critical to connect with families during this time to understand their preferences, their strengths and needs, and to make services accessible and appropriate to match the desires they have for their children. Be sure to explore the family's technology capabilities and explore resources and supports for increasing access to technology if needed. Be sure to recognize the current family context and the emotional and cognitive load that many families are undertaking during this time. Second, commit to designing virtual learning activities that engage participation. Think about children with disabilities when you develop activities. How might activities need to be adapted to ensure engagement for all children? Choices should not be disproportionately burdensome for children with disabilities and their families. Be intentional about facilitating social interactions from a distance. Consider how learning activities can fit into daily routines. Also consider how a blend of synchronous and asynchronous activities can be used to facilitate learning. And remember to always assume the best of families and help families celebrate daily successes. At ECTA, we are continually updating our website to support state and local programs during the pandemic. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you for that response. Now back to our center for more strategies and resources.
Hi, I'm Lisa Fox and the Principal Investigator of the OSIP Early Childhood TA Center, the National Center for Pyramid Model Innovations. Our focus is to help states, programs, personnel, and families implement effective social, emotional, and behavioral interventions for young children. As we consider the reopening of programs, school and program leaders have to make a host of difficult decisions as they create plans to meet the needs of children and family in the context of the variables affecting their community. Although there are many factors that are unknown, what we do know is that COVID has impacted the social, emotional, or mental health of all of us, adults, children, and leaders. As children return to brick and mortar services or receive instruction remotely, we must pay attention to the promotion of everyone's social, emotional, and mental health. To address that concern with young children, we've developed some resources that early educators can use in their reopening or remote delivery. You can find these resources on our COVID-19 pandemic page. The Leadership Team's Guide to Reopening Programs provides guidance and considerations for returning to the program and offers hyperlinks to 29 different resources that are ready for use. The guide offers resources to help children adjust to new routines, such as wearing masks and hand washing, and provides social stories that can be used for instruction. In the reopening plan, we encourage the program to consider staff wellness in addition to the support of children and their families, and offer strategies and resources that might be used. We think it is essential for programs to prioritize relationship building with families as they welcome them back to the building or reconnect for remote learning. A document, My Teachers Want to Know, offers a friendly welcome back and an inquiry to find out what has been happening at home and any concerns the family might have about the child's behavior or mental health. The guide includes classroom strategies on how to set up the classroom for success and focus on building relationships and establishing routines. For routines that must be changed, we've provided some ideas, like the no-touch greeting options. Helping children when they confront social problems, become frustrated, and need calm down strategies or express their emotions should be a big focus as our children return to the building and for families at home. We have materials ready for teachers and family members to use to help children with those critically important social emotional skills. For teachers who've been implementing the pyramid model, they have probably used Tucker the Turtle for teaching self-regulation of strong emotions, the solution kit for social problem solving, taught calm down strategies, and use emotion visuals. We now have these resources for guiding families at home. For example, Tucker the Turtle book for home. Tucker helps children learn to pull in when they're frustrated or angry and take deep breaths to calm down before reacting. How to use social problem solving at home, including the use of the home edition of the solution kit. Using a calm down area and calm down strategies, and tips for families to support themselves and their child. We have also provided guidance for connecting with families in the delivery of remote services to touch base on their concerns and progress in supporting the remote instruction and social emotional health of the child. We invite you to explore all of these resources on our website and sign up for our newsletter to receive updates as new materials are developed.
Glad to be joined by these panelists to discuss some considerations for making back to school 2020 more effective. And you can find out more about the panelists at our OSEP Ideas at Work website. So I'm just going to get right into the first question. The first question is for Glenna. There are many challenges states are facing in supporting local education agencies with getting students back to school. What planning have you done related to sustaining instruction for students with disabilities that other states may find helpful? And is Washington doing something unique to support students with disabilities?
Thank you, Lori. I think that as we went into the pandemic and we started to plan, we really had to remember the intent and purpose of IDEA. Not only that students needed to have access to make progress in the general ed curriculum, but also that they needed to receive faith and that they needed to be prepared for life after school, whether that's independent employment, education, or independent living. The priority that we've looked at is really making sure that districts and families understand that districts remain obligated to provide FAPE and to make offers of FAPE, even during the pandemic. Our planning needed to involve members just like IEP teams, with administrators, educators, parents, related servers, advocates and community organizations, and also importantly, school nurses, as we were dealing with a health issue. While developing and providing TA, we also needed to take a step back in our rush to deliver information and really offer drafts out to the public so that they could provide input. What didn't it answer? What did they still need answered? And what did they agree or not agree with? As we went into the summer, I think the next important part of our technical assistance and support was around progress monitoring and making sure that districts and families knew where students were and the progress that they had made or not made on those IEP goals. That's allowing them to spend the summer and go into the fall to design a system that's improved upon the system that they had in the emergency of the spring. We wanted to go into the fall, even regardless of whether schools would be open in person or to remote learning, and really be able to prioritize in-person services safely to those students who were unable to access or make progress during the spring. We also use the information that we gathered during the spring to identify gaps in our models so that as we went into the fall, we could identify supports to address those gaps, such as making sure that we're providing instructional information to parents in their native language, looking at where we could provide hybrid, synchronous, and asynchronous lessons that meet the family's needs. Also looking at how is it that we can further our implementation of universal design for learning, accessibility, and the use of technology, not only during COVID, but so that we're building in increased supports for when we return to full-time in-person services. We needed to look at professional development, and as it's been discussed previously, we put out resource links to free professional development around high leverage practices, evidence-based practices, instructional design, as well as essential state standards. Lastly, we really wanted to focus on effective use of funding. So looking at how do we braid and blend the use of the CARES additional funds with our state and local funds, and making sure that we're all working together. That's going to be the key: to support, to innovate, and to adapt to lead to the successful learning of our students. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenna. The next question is for Carolyn. So the end of the school year, last year, with the parents and the guardians responsible for delivering instruction, we know that that was not a sustainable option. So what has to happen to make the return to school in 2020 more successful for parents and students with disabilities?
Well, thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for that question. I'd like to respond to that question from two perspectives: from the individual family perspective and from the program policy level. So first, on the individual level, schools must work closely with each individual family, parents as well as youth of transition age, to engage in two-way communication and conversation much more frequently than we've ever had to do in the past. We must take advantage of the many resources that are available, many of whom we've heard from today, from OSEP-funded technical assistance centers. Together, family and educators should develop truly individualized plans for each student with a disability. That plan should take into account all of the issues that must be considered and addressed in an IEP, both in more typical times as well as the issues that must be addressed that are due to complications from COVID-19. And I think most importantly, we must all be willing to reconvene and readjust if the plan is not working. It is important to have current information about the child's needs, whether those are academic needs, behavioral needs, as well as health and mental health and social emotional needs. That is the first step towards developing a plan for successful transition back to school and for instructional planning. Parents could provide this information prior to school starting, and schools can continue to gather data once instruction begins. This information will guide the discussion around supports needed for the student's successful return to school in whatever format that might be: in person, hybrid, or fully remote. Secondly, at the school and district level, educators must deeply and meaningfully engage parents and families representing the full range of diversity of children with disabilities. That includes race, ethnicity, language, socio and economic status, type of disability, etc. And together, discuss how to best meet the needs of students with disabilities in decisions about whether or not to reopen, and if so, how to reopen most safely and most effectively. We must take advantage of systemic resources, such as those from the National Center for Systemic Improvement. We must provide staff development and coaching on how to provide more effective remote instruction and related services to students with disabilities. And finally, we must meet frequently to discuss how things are going and again, be willing to make changes if and when they are needed. I would like to invite you to visit the parentcenterhub.org, where you will find resources and tools for next steps. Other resources, such as the easy to use Return to School resource guide from the Tennessee Parent Center, as well as tips for parents to participate in a decision-making group, or questions to ask about returning to school. Both are available in English and Spanish, developed by SPAN, the New Jersey PTI. You can find these resources and more at the Parent Center Hub. We invite you to visit and see lots of resources there. I thank you for the opportunity to join today and be participant in this critical conversation.
Great. Thank you, Carolyn. The next question is for George. Schools are challenged by the impact of COVID-19, and we are in the midst of reopening during a time of heightened racial tensions. What can schools do to promote a positive school climate focused on equity, given the already stressed situation?
Thank you, Lori. Great question, and I'll try to do my best to answer that question for you. But first of all, thank you for supporting these webinars. It's been great to have the chance to be able to be part of this conversation, to listen to these presentations, and to share with you some considerations in response to that question. My goal is probably not to address that specifically, except in the context of highlighting some of the things from the other presentations, which were great. I think one of the challenges of the participants is going to be able to figure out how to pick and choose what to take away from this last 90 minutes, because there's lots of great information and lots of great resources. So I'd like to start by saying there are 5 guiding principles that seem to function as the foundation, the presentations, and my response to your question. I'm going to briefly go through each of those, and then I'm going to go into 2 buckets of actions that we can take in response to your question. The first principle is, which I think is true across this whole 90 minutes, is that words are really important. They provide us with focus and vision and communication. But our words must be precise, positive, contextually and culturally relevant, or they're just words. The second guiding principle is that doable actions are needed to support the substance of those words. Words have no meaning if there's not actions behind them that improve our ability to engage in effective professional development, engage in effective explicit instruction, and to be able to teach. And teaching is not just literacy, calculus, physical ed. It's about teaching tolerance, kindness, safety, responsibility. It's also about making sure that we promote those across remote, hybrid, and even typical school settings. Principle number 3, I think advancement starts with individual behavior change. So we go from words to behavior, but the individual has to commit to those changes. And that's changes at all levels, at student level, the educator level, administrator, and family members, and so forth. Principle number 4, if those individual change actions occur systematically and directly, we provide empowerment. Empowerment occurs when groups of individuals come together around a common vision, a language, and experience, much like this webinar was, with a strong appreciation for individuality and diversity. The outcomes of an effective organization are one in which we have efficiency and effectiveness and relevance. But organizations don't change unless the individuals begin that change, and the organizations don't become empowered without individuals working together. I also want to go to the last principle, which is empowered individuals and groups have to engage in action in order for there to be change. We need to act preventatively and constructively by improving the precision of our own vocabulary, by writing just and equitable policies and procedures, by giving priority to evidence-based practices, and by applying our some, all, few MTS logic to our work. It's really important to remember, whether remote, hybrid, or at school, teaching must at minimum be effective, efficient, explicit, and culturally and racially just and equitable. Important basis for the work that we do. So to finish up, I've got two major action buckets that I'd like all of us on this webinar and outside of it to think about. And the two action buckets fall into two categories. One is systems level, and the second one is going to be what you and I can do individually. And there are 5 of each, and I'll just go through them quickly. At the systems level, I think it's really important for each of us to think carefully about how we endorse and vote for those people who will act on behalf of students with disabilities and their families and kids of color. The second big act is we have to join and support organizations who endorse and display just and equitable visions and actions. So vote, join. The third one is to invest in educational initiatives that give priority and attention to educating students with disabilities and support for their families. The fourth item in this bucket is we have to give priority to smart selection and use of evidence-based practices, as was mentioned by a number of the presenters already. And the last one in this first bucket is we have to, on a daily basis, become allies for our kids and our families and our colleagues who may not have the capacity or the opportunity to engage in the kinds of opportunities we provide as educators and teachers. So given those 5 big action buckets for the systems level, there are 5 that I quickly want to summarize for everyday acts. And I really want to encourage people to pay attention to these because I'm going to be giving you a homework assignment when I get done with them. And the first one is, I think it's really important that when we wake up in the morning, we look in the mirror and we make sure that we take our equity and justice temperature. We need to make sure that we check our academic and social behavior actions with a lens of access, justice, equity, and student benefit. Because otherwise, we develop misrules and prejudices that get in the way of maximizing our outcomes. The second big idea is that we on this call must model the words and actions or behaviors that represent a just, equitable, and harm-free culture. If we don't model those ourselves, we're not going to be able to defend what we ask other people to do. Third, we are smart enough to be able to pre-correct or act preemptively in predictable problem situations. We know when these problems are likely to occur at the kid level, at the classroom level, and the school level. We should be smart enough to act preemptively to try to address those. Many of you on this webinar are thinking about the start of school. Many of you can anticipate some of the challenges. What are we going to be thinking about systematically in addressing those? Fourth, it's incumbent upon each of us to to teach and recognize displays of just, equitable actions displayed by others. Because if we don't let other people know when we see things that are just and equitable, it's unlikely that they'll continue to do those same actions. And lastly, we have to engage kids on an active and regular basis. We know that individualized, specialized engagements are particularly important for our kids with disabilities, but they're in fact true for all kids. So here's the homework assignment. Each of the people who are part of this webinar, I would encourage you to write down on a piece of paper a commitment to do something tomorrow. Do something tomorrow that's doable, just, and equitable, based on what you've heard everybody else presenting. It could be a phone call. It could be a drive-by. It could be a yard sign. It could be a community video. It could be a website posting. It could be acknowledging somebody. It should be sending an email to let them know what you appreciate about what they're doing. At minimum, these actions result in meaningful engagement. And when you have meaningful engagements, you develop enhanced relationships. And coming out of those enhanced relationships are maximum student benefits. You can't get student outcomes without a relationship, and you can't get in a relationship without engagement. So with that, I know there's a lot of little lists in there. I would encourage you to pick at least one thing to do and do it tomorrow and commit to doing that. Please turn in your homework assignment to Lori. She's going to check to see if you do something tomorrow. And I thank you for this opportunity. And I really do want to acknowledge all of you that are participating in this call, or this webinar, because you are the folks that are going to make this happen. So thank you.
Oh, thank you, George. Great information and great tips. And I am looking forward to the homework assignments, and I'll be happy to share the responses that I receive with the panelists. But we have a few more minutes. So I just was wondering if anyone had any final considerations or thoughts that you would like to share as we go into this Back to School 2020 challenge. So any last tips that any of you would like to share with our group today?
Yes, Lori, thank you. One of the things that I think I have heard the most about following this spring is a lack of communication with parents and educators. And so I know that as we're going into kind of still unknown, we tend to retreat when we're scared, when we're nervous. And this is a time where we really need to move forward and engage with each other, as Dr. Sagai referenced. We need to build relationships. We need to focus on what we know and what we can do. And when we know better, we need to do better. But we really need to make sure that we keep that flow of communication going to benefit the student.
Great, thank you. Carolyn?
I couldn't agree more. I totally agree. I do think that these are unprecedented times for families and educators. They are uncertain times, and that means they're fearful times. But the more we can continue to communicate and to share information, I think this was a wonderful opportunity to hear from so many different experts in the field. And I think that that is helpful because folks are looking for some information on which to base these very difficult decisions. So appreciate the opportunity, and I thank you, Dr. Sagai, for the challenge and the homework assignments.
Great. George, any last comments that you would like to
I
make?
do. I just want to reinforce the idea that both Glenna and Carolyn were talking about. I mean, we need to communicate in a way that's culturally appropriate. We need to be communicating ways that are honest and be willing to correct ourselves when we make mistakes. The challenges right now are so engrossing in the sense that there's some difficult things going on right now, and the COVID-19 context makes it even worse. And I think we have to engage. That engagement then creates those opportunities for us to be able to teach well. And I want to say something that somebody else said earlier in the video, and that is good instruction is good instruction, whether it's academic or social, emotional or behavioral. What I encourage people to do, though, is be strategic about that. You can't teach everything, and you can't teach all the time, especially under these conditions of being in and out of school. So we've got to be really explicit. And as my friend Rob Horner says, pick the smallest thing you can do to have the biggest effect and make sure student benefit is measurable. Because without some kind of positive change, we can't defend our decisions. And it's going to be impossible to do what we did before, but we can do something that's going to be meaningful to kids and families. And I really do believe it's important that we pay attention to the issues around kids of color and their families and the difficult social context in which we put a lot of families in, given everything that's going on. So I'll end with that. Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you, panelists. Any last minute comments before we close out?
Thank you, Lori, for doing these.
Yes, well, thank you. So unfortunately, our time is up, but I do want to thank our presenters and for you for joining us today. So please share the link to these resources with others who may find them helpful, and let them know how we can continue to support your efforts. Back to school 2020 is definitely going to be different, but I challenge us all to find the opportunities in this time. Opportunities to reconceptualize how we can make education work better for children and families. Thank you for your commitment to the children. Thank you to the OSEP staff and AIR staff for their continued support in these very successful webinars. Really appreciate all of your efforts and your support. Be safe, be healthy, and best wishes as you move into a very, very successful but challenging 2021 school year. And again, thank you for joining us today.